Now we are going to discuss about sustainability and the business relationships. As we were discussing in the last discussion, when we were talking of the fair trade practices, so this is somewhat a step towards sustainability issues, or when we are talking towards like the ethical sourcing, it is a step towards the sustainability issues. When we are talking of fair trade, it is a like the producers of everyday requirement things like tea, coffee, banana, maybe pulses, and all these things do get a certificate of fair trade as certified by an independent body only when they follow certain sustainable practices in the process of producing their goods in their own firms, and as if only they follow these practices, then they get they can use the logo of fair trade, and that's where they get the benefit of like getting and that gets evaluated by an independent body, audited by an independent body, and after it only the certification is done, and then they are entitled to certain benefits, like at least of a minimum of a price that we discussed, the price that they get for taking care of the sustainability issues with respect to the environment and maybe the social ways of how their employees have been taken care of. So, and the premium for developing oneself, and more opportunities for community development, and maybe making their own cooperatives and creating more employment, all people, wider community development, and the making it like more and more interest from the buyers for organizations for producers who are following the fair trade practices, so that it increases its domain also of how it is doing its business and getting in more customers. It would be a benefit for the producers who are following the fair trade practices, because then this could lead to signing of long-term contracts for long-term planning and sustainable production practices. So, by the controlling organizations, the body which controls the fair trade practices, they can give some partial advance to these type of to these producers also who are following the fair trade practices, so that they can develop and become more competent in following these practices. So, fair trade practices to some extent ensures like this sustainability issues, like taking care of the environment and the social issues by treating its employees properly, giving a fair wage, proper working conditions, and not there is no exploitation of labor, no child labor and all, taking care of the minimum requirements of the employees involved in it, and taking care of the environmental issues like no pollution or depletion is done. So, these type of concerns have already been taken care of by the producers, and if they have taken care of it, then only they get the certificate of this fair trade, and that makes them eligible for the associated benefits for the fair trade practices. Though this fair trade practice may have some negative or ethical issues related to it also, like in order to get these benefits, the focus of these producers could be more on the early part of the supply chain, where they have taken care of the methods of how to produce things, and of the social and the environmental issues related to producing things, in so that they can get the certificate of fair trade and the associated benefits. But there are less of ethical issues, or maybe followed, while it comes to like when dealing with the retailers in the for the or for in the way that the marketing is done. So that the later part of the supply chain may get neglected by the producers, who are who becomes members of these fair trade practices, because in order to get the certificate, that could be the focus, and ethical decisions regarding the latter part of the supply chain may get affected. However, this is one of the initial steps when or ways in which we are talking of sustainability, and the concept of sustainability, where for getting some maybe economic focusing into some economic perspective, and to get some benefits in sustainability in that regard, it is essential that the social and the environmental part has to be taken care of. Only then the economic perspective can be reached or fulfilled. So, in that way it is the one of the ways. So, we can tell like so this fair trade is therefore concerned with more than just the fairness of the exchange processes, where the people get at least a minimum price for their products, or some safety is ensured, like whichever is the higher the minimum price, or the actual price in which the things get sold will be given to them. But it is one of the type of exchanges. It is definitely one of the concern, but it is not like the one concern only. They are also concerned about the social and the environmental part also. So, it is we can tell like it is just not just the economic consideration, but to lead to that the other things need to be taken care of also. So, it is one of the primary ways that the things are taken care of, but it is like concerned with a small type of businesses who are connected to each other. So, when you are talking of sustainability, and so it is we can tell like these ethical sourcing and this fair trade, these are first stepping stones, first steps towards the issues of how the business processes and the business relationships get involved in the sustainability issues, where this preserving resources for the future generations also this is are involved, so that they can also use these resources for their own survival and benefit. So, though this concept does not extend to that depth, but we can tell like the this is the first step towards that movement, because when we are talking of sustainability issues, we are more focusing, because when we are talking of sustainability issues, we are more focusing into the beyond how one firm is taking care of its business practices to of the environmental and the social practices as per the expectation of the fair trade. We are also taking into concern the how the intra firm relationship of the different business processes are taken care of, or the inter firm relationship also. So there is a connectivity between the use of resources, no wastages, and maybe maximum utility of the resources. So these type of concepts are taken care of in order to reach the sustainability, which we are going to discuss in details now. So what actually here we are trying to focus on is the shift in concept from like supply chains to supply loops. So when you're talking of supply loops, these are like product end of life management strategies that fulfill the two criteria, like they divert end of life products from landfill or incineration by collecting them for economic value recovery. The reprocessing of these end of life products produces secondary resources that replace primary resources in forward supply chain. So like this if we can remember, we discussed in the last discussions only, when we were talking of like ethical consumptions and the sustainability issues in consumptions. We focus towards like how there is a disposal management and how there is a recycling of the products, which like it's instead of a linear supply chain, we were looking into a cyclical supply chain connected in terms of loops or cycles, where the end recovery is done at the end of the life to take care of the disposal issues, and it is recycled, value added in a proper way, so that the economic value of it increases, and it either supplies becomes a supply for the some other organizations where it can act as a input material, or it becomes like new products, secondary product, and it gets its own niche customers who are buying it in a price. And so the end, when some products have end its end of life, so how to give more worth to it, economic value is recovered and value addition is done to it, so it gains its like new life cycle. So that is the focus of this when you're talking of from supply chain to supply loops, along with this waste reducing techniques, because nothing is according to this concept, nothing is waste, because the wastes are reincarnated in a different way with a different value addition, and it becomes input for another industry, or it gains its own value, which becomes an end product in itself and which has an economic worth of itself. So this whole field has, again as discussed earlier, given rise to a new whole sort of industry which deals with waste management, producing of things from recycling things, then backward supply chain. So, how to take how to collect these end of life materials, goods, how end of life goods from the consumers, and what is the backward supply chain, so that it moves back to the original producers who take care of these waste, try to add value to it, and then it is getting as an input into a different organization, or is sold as a secondary product. So, these type of things has become more important when we are trying to look into the sustainability issues. So, and it is also a very important potential source for value recovery. From this, we, like when we are talking of the the waste of one organization may be input material or resource for the other organization. The concept that we are hinting towards is that of the industrial ecosystem. So, what we can see from this slide is that when when you're talking of industrial ecosystem, the relative placement of the industries who can share their resources or their output, and the output of one becomes the input, the waste of one becomes the input of the other. So, and the relative placement of these industries in a close vicinity gives rise to the concept of industrial ecosystem. Like if you can see, the power plant has, like when it comes, fly ash and limestone acts as a input for this wallboard industry. The cement company gives out low grade cement, which also comes as an input to this. So, the fly ash of this company is an input to the cement company. The chemical plant has chemicals which becomes gives out chemicals which becomes an input to this company. So, this gives out high sulfur gas which becomes an input to this company. So, the surplus steam for heat, it goes for the fishery, then it gives to the firm. So, enzyme steam is used in the enzyme plant, which gives the waste as fertilizer, which gets used by the firm, and the oil refinery gives out wastewater for cooling, which is given to the chemical plant, and the wastewater, this uses the steam given out by the power plant, and the oil refinery gives out wastewater for cooling, which is used again by the power plant. So, we can see that there is a network of sharing of the like the secondary type of things coming out as a result of producing your main products, and these secondary things which we generally term as waste, and it involves cost and may have an environmental effect and a social effect also in terms of the social cost and harm produced by people, by the organization to people who may be residing in that area or maybe in farthest locality, but because it gets maybe into the water or into the air, the people are also sharing social cost of your waste. But if it is a planned activity, then nothing gets stated as waste, because this becomes the input resource for the second type of industry for which this is actually required as an input. So, and if these industries are placed in close vicinity with each other, then the sharing of these resources will help, of course, in wastage reduction, because nothing remains as that of the waste. It helps in energy saving, it helps in the preservation of the resources, because we don't have to start afresh to find out our resources and produce it. It is there. We have to like use it or modify it to certain extent so that it acts as secondary resources. Also, there is less depletion of the maybe non-renewable resources. In that way, it is getting preserved for the future generations who can use it. So, in this way, we are talking of an industrial ecosystem who takes care of how the one company becomes a supplier for the other company, and they all are residing in a synergy with each other, which is ultimately beneficial for both their own existence, because the one is in the supplier is in my vicinity, and whatever they are producing as secondary products, which is not their primary focus, is become an input for me. The suppliers are also do not have to be get worried about where do I get my customers from, because the business the corporates who will be their customers are also residing in their vicinity, and they can enter into a mutuality of trust and like dependence relationship, and that's how this network of relationship developed between the industries who can share their resources with each other develops an industrial ecosystem which is beneficial for their survival as well as preserving resources for the future generation also, thus taking care of the sustainability. We will summarize the discussions of today's module. Like what we have focused today, we have focused on the different the stake held by other companies in the corporation. So, in this discussion we were talking of business to business relationship as compared to other discussions done where we were talking of the business individual relationships, and two of the major relationships that we have discussed over here are that of the suppliers and the competitors with the corporation and their relative ethical issues that have been which could be there in the relationship of the supplier with the corporation or the competitors with the corporation. So, we argued, like the argument was also that there are issues of ethical nature that went well beyond the legal protection of fair competition, because when you are talking of fair competition, because of the differential powers of the different competitors, is whether it is the scenario, the environment, the market environment, the purchase environment is actually that even if there is a legal protection, but whether it actually functions in that way or not, but or it in order to curb the competition, to get a hold over the total market, to get a hold of over the customers. So, what are the process, maybe steps taken, tactics taken in terms of maybe getting hold of information or dirty tricks played, so that you can capture the market sort of thing. So these are there even if there are legal protections for fair competitions, but we can understand like even if it is expected, the scenario is not always that of a fair competition, and ethical issues are there, and we have dealt with the ethical issues. We have understood like how these issues become more prominent in terms of like in terms of anti-competition or reducing the competitor strength, in terms of or how to buy sort of thing, the supplier's loyalty, and whether it is required or not. Do we give a preferential treatment? Why do we go to a developing country? So these issues have become prominent in case of globalization and business ethics also, and so where the scope of the problems have become increased, and that's how what has become more important in these cases are the expanded responsibilities of the corporations over their operations and also to their stakeholders. So when you've talked of these extended responsibilities, we have tried to discuss about the ethical sourcing issues, and we have also tried to discuss the fair trade practices with respect to how do you take care of the indigenous producers of some goods, and what are the practices that you extended responsibility do you have towards the supplier of suppliers or to the suppliers. In that light also we have seen the role of the political role of the corporate and what power it can exercise to make the suppliers follow certain practices, ethical standards and practices through these processes of ethical sourcing and fair trade, where they are bound to follow certain practices if they want to enter into a business relationship with the MNCs. And we have discussed about practices like techniques taken, that of disengagement and engagement, where you try to tell the suppliers like we are not going to source from you if you are not following these practices, to an extended responsibility of trying to develop them, educate them, develop the competencies in them so that they are able to take care of these ethical standards, practices, and become competent enough to follow these practices. So that talks again of the extended responsibility of the business to its like suppliers and maybe the suppliers of suppliers. We have also discussed the extended role of the business relationship, of how it can take care of the social and environmental issues, in which we have discussed like these again ethical sourcing and the fair trade practices, which is where the companies are entering into business relationship, economic relationship, only when they have taken care of the practices which are relevant for social and environmental, taking care of the environmental and the social issues. From that, the supply chain, we have extended the concept to supply loop, where all the business processes are getting connected to each other for a particular organization, and we are talking of like end of life product management issues, how to take care of the wastages, how to give a new shape, a new dimension to the waste, how to develop it in such way so the economic value of it is getting added, and how to think of the backward supply chain to collect these end of life products, and what are the supply chain issues related to it, and how to convert it so that it recycling of it, how to convert it into products so that it finds its utility, maybe as a secondary resource, as a raw material for another type of organization. So these are challenges that needs to be answered, and by the whole supply chain loop. And in that context also we have discussed about the industrial economy, where the we have discussed about the industrial ecology, where we are talking of the relative placement of the industries in the environment, business environment, where the secondary output of one gets introduced as the input of the other organization, and in that way it ensures coexistence of each other, sustenance of each other, survival of each other, and also correspondingly takes care of the wastages, more of resource utility, less of depletion of resources, less of pollution and all. So, and not social harm produced in terms of unforeseen damages from letting these waste products being flowing into the or getting absorbed by the environment. So this talks of taking care of the unforeseen damages also, unforeseen harm also, and preserving the resources for the requirement of the future generation, and hints towards the sustainability of the whole supply chain system. Thank you.